Welcome everybody to another episode of Think with a Drink. That's the weekly series brought to you by the ARIES Foundation for Financial Education. Tonight we're doing tackling debt. We're appropriately equipped for that. So next slide, just real quick with you on this. So just a real quick checklist. Just know it's pre-recorded, but there will be a chat box. So you can drop questions into the chat box and we will be able to field them. They will come to us. It's just not going to be while you're watching the show, but we will get back to you on that. Next slide. So real quick for you, your presenters for this evening. My name is Tom Alessi. I am the president of the ARIES Foundation for Financial Education. I have been in financial services for now, I'm in my 23rd year. I'm an investment advisor, which means I act as a fiduciary whenever giving guidance or advice to any of my clients. I'm going to bring my vice president, Craig, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Craig Richardson. I am the vice president of the ARIES Foundation. I've been in financial services a little over 17 years now, and I do financial planning for families and small businesses, come up with comprehensive financial plans so they can have a better relationship with their money.
Terrific. Next slide, just so you know that the Think with a Drink is brought to you by the ARIES Foundation for Financial Education. You can visit us at www.ariesfoundation.org. We're a nonprofit. We're located in Newton, Massachusetts. But our mission statement is trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money. Because whether you realize it or not, you are in a relationship with your money. And just like every other personal relationship that you might have, there are behaviors and emotional triggers that occur that cause us to act irrationally sometimes when it comes to dealing with our money and our finances. All Craig and I try to do, and the whole mission of ARIES, is trying to help everybody take a little bit of that emotion out of handling your money. Next slide, these are disclosures, and just know, like I said, we're a nonprofit. We do this for educational purposes. We share these on our website. We share them on our YouTube channel. We share them on newtv.org. You can visit them and check out our show there. All we ask is that if you're going to share them, you do it in an educational manner as well. Okay? Brings us to the fun part of this evening. We call this Think with a Drink because we like to do this in an educational manner, but we like to have fun with it, and we can't think of a better way to do that than as if our audience has something nice and cold to sip on, imbibe while they're watching the show. Tonight, this evening, we are drinking Nightlight from Night Shift Brewing. They're local here in Boston. You can check them out, but this is a light lager done in a way that a light lager should be done. It's definitely refreshing, definitely enjoyable, and certainly can keep the party going all night long. Skål. Next.
You poured faster than me.
Oh, you didn't pour it fast enough. That's
well,
okay.
Yes.
So we're talking about tackling debt, right? And so, you know, it's understanding the debt situation. And for this, for most people, what they wind up with is too much month at the end of their money. And what you want to have, obviously, is too much money at the end of your month. So the idea is if I'm spending more on some of my debt costs and debt obligations, this is a problem. This is something I need to address and to be looking at. Next slide. Right, so why is debt a concern? Well, you know, right now, the outstanding debt out there, you know, I think it says it's someplace over $13 trillion, right? But most people are not putting money away.
Right.
On an average, you know, workers are not saving. We did a thing where we talked about, you know, where the average person right now, like less than 25% of the people out there, you know, I understand COVID and the pandemic had something to do with it, but they have less than $1,000 in the bank. Right. That emergency reserves fund. And that is something that you need to be thinking about and understanding, we get living paycheck to paycheck, but you've got to be planning, and you really can't be planning on a savings goal until you know what you're spending. And spending becomes spending on what I'm spending, but spending on what I'm spending as far as debt is concerned, and what it's costing me to buy some of the stuff that I'm buying, when I'm buying it, how I'm buying it, and most importantly, right, Craig, why I'm buying it.
Right, I think that becomes a bigger issue with people when it comes to debt is, you go and you finance something because the payments seem easy. But what you don't realize sometimes is doing the math is just how much is the thing that you're buying costing you. I mean, if I'm buying a $25 pair of jeans, I guess that's cheap for jeans, but.
He's old, that's not saying
All right, let's say it's a
anything.
$100 pair of jeans. There we go, $100 pair of jeans, but I'm paying a 15% interest rate over, and it takes me a year to pay them off. Well, I didn't pay $100 for the jeans, I paid $115 for the jeans, right? So it's really understanding how debt and the interest it accumulates on that can become one of those overwhelming type of situations.
Next slide. Right, so 3 tips for tackling debt. And we're going to go through each one of these with you. But it's recognize debt, and by that, like Craig sort of alluded to there, what that cost is and what it means, and then understanding how those costs measure out, and then steps and ways to take control. And we will walk you through a couple of methods how we deal with debt and try to help you get a handle on dealing with debt. So next slide. So, recognizing it is, understand, if you have a worry about paying the bills, then we have expenses that get broken down. Like when we talk to everybody, you've got must-pay expenses, right?
Yes.
The rent, the mortgage, or the mortgage, utilities, food in the house.
Yeah, you need to eat, right?
Yeah. But food in the house, right? In the fridge, in the cabinets, not eating out, right? Those are the must-pay expenses. Then you've got yourself. And in the case of yourself, that might be paying off debt, right? That might be the first step towards a savings goal is I'm paying this debt down. And once I get it paid down, I'm not going to take on more debt. I'm now going to put that towards savings. Then your discretionary income. And the problem for most people is the discretionary income usually gets put in front of all of those other pieces because, hey, we want to have fun. We get it. We understand that, but you got to figure it out and make sure you're sort of building that out, right? Credit cards, God bless. We understand. It's a plastic world right now, and especially with COVID, nobody's using real money. But try to limit the number of cards. Right?
Absolutely, yep.
That's a big thing. And, if you can only pay the minimum, well, now we need to think about, we'll talk about this when we get into how to take control of debt, but how to do that, it makes sense. And then if you don't have emergency reserves, as Craig and I will, keep expounding to everybody, you better have 6 to 8 weeks of expenses at least in place.
Yeah, and I'm going to say too, I know we'll get in a little bit later to how people manage the debt and getting debt paid off. But one thing I always think is important, especially because a lot of people don't necessarily have enough emergency reserves, is not to put off saving until you've paid off debt. Do it in relationship with, do it at the same time. Yeah. Save and pay off. The reason being is that because if you're always going to wait until the debt's paid off, then it's going to be like Tom says, the train's never going to come to the station. You're never going to start saving. If you can do that as you're doing, even though it may take you a little bit longer, at least you feel when you get to the end of that debt being paid off, you've now got the reserve, which gets you out of that hamster wheel of now reoccurring debt.
Absolutely, and it's very important to consider that and to be thinking about it, and we'll talk about that when we get into those methods, making sure that you're on that list. You're one of those must-pay things that go in there.
You're
Next
a debt,
slide.
yes.
So this is what Craig talked about, like understanding the cost of debt. Now, in this case, we're talking about a $10,000 debt, right, that goes out over, and you can see it's 1 year, and the interest rate there is 12.5%. Now, I understand we're in a low interest rate environment right now, but in 2021, the average credit card interest that is being charged is over 16%. So 12.5 isn't that high when you look at what the average being charged on a credit card, and that's credit cards across all swaths, right? That's bank cards, that's store cards, all credit cards, that the average interest rate is 16%. So if you do this out and just look at it and say, I bought this item for $10,000, like Craig said, but it took me 5 years to pay it off. Well, now suddenly it costs me almost $3,500 more to pay it off over that 5-year time period. And if this was an item that took me more than that, 10 years, it's almost cost me twice as much.
But if that was the price tag on it from the beginning, would you have bought it?
Exactly.
Right, so.
And that's what you need to be thinking about, right? And some of this comes down to that, wait, do I really need to buy this today where I'm trying to finance the whole $10,000, or can I wait? Can I hold off for 6 months, 8 months, a year, and buy it where I've put away money and I've built up some sort of provision, what do you call it, emergency reserve
Reserves,
or funding, right, or whatever.
Or saving for that goal.
Saving
right.
for the goal, exactly. And I'm now able to, instead of 10,000, maybe I'm only financing 7,500 or 5,000, whatever it is, because I'm limiting that amount. That's money that's going to mean something to me as I go forward in time. One of the biggest things with it, because that's what happens. We buy stuff and we put it on finance. And we don't think about what's that going to cost me next year? What's it going to cost me 2 or 3 years? However, I've blocked to pay this off. Because a lot of times, hey, you get to pay it off in 4 years or 5 years or whatever the thing says.
Well, what was that big thing that was around a while ago? I don't know if they're even still around. Rent-A-Center? Right.
They're still around.
They're still around? Yeah. You pay 50, I can afford $25 a week for a TV for 6 years, and it cost me $7,000 for a television set. But
yes, but that's what it comes down to. It's being able to do it in such a way that you can hold off. Now, we understand there are some times where it's like, the car broke down, I got to buy a car, right? That type of thing. Okay, you've got to do what you got to do. But for most of us, we're buying because it makes us feel good and we want something out of it. And delayed gratification is a big part of this. Being able to take a step back and say, wait, can I wait 24 hours or 2 days and just decide whether or not this is the right thing and then come back to it? That's ultimately what's going to do the best thing for you.
And in this case, we're talking about unsecured debt. So we're not talking about buying a car or buying a house. We're talking about just paying for things on a credit card versus money out of your savings account.
Right. Next. All right. So ways to take control, right? So we just talked a little bit about that in terms of changing your approach, right? So before, the way it used to be with home equity, you could use your home equity and get a tax break on that. That doesn't really exist anymore, but it's still there, right? If you need to get out of debt, you can still use it to get out of debt.
Correct, yeah. You can still do what they call HELOCs, which is a loan on top of, right? The issue is once you, like you said, unless it's part of your first mortgage instead of your second mortgage or your HELOC, it's no longer, you can no longer write off the interest. Right. But once again, they changed the laws anyway, so you have to have so much interest before you can write it off anyway. So, yeah.
But then there's also credit counselors. Also, and that's part of what we do. That's part of what ARIES is about. The whole idea for us is trying to help everybody sort of get a handle on it. And we'll talk about ways to manage debt and ways, the best sort of theories and practicum in terms of going through that. But that's really why we're here. The whole idea is trying to help everybody understand and get a little bit with it, because sometimes it gets overwhelming. It gets, feels very daunting, like there's all this debt, I'm never going to get out of it. But there are approaches and ways that you can take control. Yeah,
the other thing you got to do is, like Tom was saying, you got to be ready to take control, right? So a lot of times people will roll in, do a home equity loan to consolidate debt. Well, why would they do that? Because if you're paying 12.5% on average or higher, and I can get a 4 or 5% rate on a second mortgage, well, it allows me to get out of debt a little bit quicker. And everything's in one place, you're paying in one payment. The issue is now, just because you're free doesn't mean you go out and get yourself back into the trap again. Oh, okay, all my credit cards are open. Let me go now on vacation and go do something. Now you're back on that what we call hamster wheel. And not only that, you're digging a bigger hole because you're still making payments on the last amount of debt. So you have to be in a position where I'm done with it. I want to move on. I want to get this debt gone.
Next slide. All right, so the different methods for taking control of debt. And really, no matter how you slice it, no matter how you break it down, there's 3 different ways for this, right? 2 of them work, 1 of them doesn't, right? So if you just look at this and said, I've got 4 debts, and let's just say for practical purposes, I am paying $100 towards each debt right? I said 4, right?
You said 4, so that'd be $400, yes. Mm-hmm.
See, that's why he's here, to keep me on track. Right?
I do math.
So $400 a month that I'm paying towards this debt. They're not, the minimum payments are not $100 each. That's what I'm doing. That's what's known as the shotgun method. I've got these debts and I am basically paying them. I'm paying a little bit more on each one of them, trying to get them all paid down at the same time. That method, the shotgun method, doesn't work because inevitably you get drawn into it and you don't ever find like you get out of it. Like Craig said, the analogy of the hamster wheel, it just feels like it's always there. Like we keep repeating the same cycle over and over and over again, and you just never get yourself out of it. So the ones we subscribe to are either math or momentum. Math says what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, instead of paying $100 across those 4 debts, I'm going to take the one that's got the highest interest rate, the one that costs me the most. I'm going to pay the 3 other debts, the minimum that would be on those, and I'm going to take the rest of the money from the 400 and focus it on the one that costs me the most from an interest rate perspective. And I'm going to deal with that one. That works because you're dealing with the one that's costing you the most. That's math. For Craig and I, though, the one that we think works best is momentum. And momentum says the same thing, except for instead of looking at it from the highest interest rate, it's the smallest balance. The lowest debt that you have, the card with the smallest balance, I'm going to take all of that money, I'm going to pay the minimum on my other cards, but I'm going to take all that's left over and I'm going to focus it on that smallest debt. And then once that gets paid off, I'm going to move to the next one. And then take all of that and move it to the next one. And the whole thing with this is it's accomplishment. Once you start getting that debt off the books, you feel like you're doing something. You're making progress. You're feeling that I can do this, I can accomplish it. And as Craig said, one of the biggest things is you can't take on more debt as this is happening, right? That's just going to blow the whole thing up. You've got to be prepared and mentally, focused to go through this. And then once you get it all set up, like I said, one of the things is you've got to then be like, okay, that $400 a month, that's now going towards whatever savings goal I had.
Right.
Whether that's I'm trying to buy a new car, I'm trying to buy a house, I want to save for retirement, the kids' education, whatever it may be, that's what you need to be doing with that money. You can't take on more debt at that time because then you just go back into the same, we're back on the hamster wheel and here we are in debt all over again.
Right. I mean, really, it's about changing behavior, and changing behavior isn't easy, right? So if you're used to, well, I just charge it on a credit card, I can pay for it later, and I'll dig myself out, and well, I got my tax return back, so I'll pay my debt off. Oh, I'm out of debt, I can start this all over again. That's just, you get into a groove of how you get used to doing things that's very difficult to get out, right? So you got to understand you got to change the behavior. The other way to do that too is, like Tom said, use a momentum system so you feel good about the direction you're taking, the momentum. It's like when you get a rock moving, it's much easier to push it, yes. Right? The other thing that helps is if you have a goal in mind, right? If I get the debt paid off, then I can start saving for X, right? Or something that's a positive is going to happen as an outcome. You're going to reward yourself somehow, not by buying something on your credit card, but by doing something for yourself as a reward to say, look, I accomplished this, and if I do this, this is going to happen. Because it makes it just keep something in focus as you're going through the process.
And one of the things, and as Craig had mentioned before, right, so one of the things that's important with this, like we talked about, so let's just use that example where, again, there was sort of 4 cards, $100 a card, that's what I had set aside for debt. But as part of that, I need to be making sure that I'm also still contributing, whether I have a savings goal that was an emergency reserve fund, whether it was a savings goal that was a retirement account, whatever it may be, that has to be along with that. And if it might be that, well, in order to do that, I can't do 400, I can only do 350, right? And $50 is going to go into my savings goal or my retirement goal or whatever it might be. That's what you've got to do, because you can't, as Craig said, you can't have this, well, I'll wait till the debt gets paid off, and then I'll start saving for retirement or buying a house or whatever's coming down the line. It's just never going to happen. It's just the reality of it. And we deal with people all the time who do this. It's just never going to happen. You wind up in a situation of just keep putting it off, putting it off, putting it off, and you never end up saving ultimately.
Right. And unless, Tom, someone has, $14 trillion in personal debt, they're not alone, right? There's a lot of Americans out there that are struggling with debt. And the reason is because the world makes it easy to get into debt, right? Every store you walk into wants to give you one of their store credit cards. You can go online and apply for credit cards. You can get an Amazon card and get yourself in debt in one click on your phone, right? They're making it really easy to separate you from your money and your future money. So don't feel bad if you fell into that trap. The issue is now you need to recognize that and say, how am I going to take control? And that's why we're here.
Yes. Next slide. Right, so again, changing your approach. We just talked about this, but the idea there is, trying to limit, as Craig said, that, sitting down and having cards everywhere in terms of going through this just doesn't work. We understand it's a plastic world. You need to have a card, but you don't need to have 10 of them. and tracking them and keeping track of that becomes the problem with it. As this said, pay the high cards first. I'm sorry, we're going to disagree in terms of that slide because our whole thing is it's more about momentum. We think momentum works. Math is good. It does work, but we're more about momentum with that, right? If you can consolidate and get a low rate, that's great. Most of the people that we talk to who are in this situation, unfortunately, don't have the credit to be able to do that, the rating in terms of being able to consolidate and get a better or lower rate. But if you can do it, great. That says, talk about paying, tuition. The idea is a student loan is good debt. You're bettering yourself, right? So a student loan, that's okay. That's like a home. It's you're building up equity. You're building up equity in yourself. It's just don't think about doing it on a credit card because what's going to happen there is you're going to get a better rate with a federal student loan than you will with a credit card.
By far, yeah.
Next slide. So this is, again, the home equity. We talked a little bit about the home equity in terms of what's there and being able to use it. It used to be great to be able to use it because you could get a tax break with it as far as going through that. We do still recommend to people that if you do have a home and you do have equity in your property, that you open up a HELOC, as Craig said, a home equity line
of credit,
just to have it. You don't have to use it. It doesn't cost you anything until you actually take the money. But if you put it in place for that absolute fail-safe, something happened, the job ended, the world caved in, I need to access funds, it's open. Because there are certain times where you can't get it if you don't have the credit rating or don't have a job or employment in terms of going through.
Well, especially if you don't have that emergency reserve built up yet, because it's going to give you a much cheaper line of credit than using a credit card would, especially if you're trying to access cash. Right, because cash, when you go to a credit card, is even more, much higher interest rates. Yes,
like the 20-25% rate.
Yeah, and a lot of times with a fee.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
Next slide. Right. So this just talks about having a credit counselor, but having somebody. We always talk about ARIES as almost, and we're in the jerseys, right, as a coach, right? So the idea is that you have a financial coach. You have somebody that you can turn to, that you can ask questions, that you can say, hey, yeah, I'm interested, or can you help me, give me a little guidance, give me a little advice. That's what that's about. It's having somebody that you can turn to say, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you think this makes sense? We know that the end of the line is bankruptcy, right? Which, it is an option at the absolute end of the line.
And for some people, it can be a life-saving option. Absolutely. And if you have to do that, you shouldn't feel ashamed. You should do what you got to do.
Right.
Right.
But there are ways that you can actually take control of your debt without doing that. But if it comes to it, that's another option. It's something else that we can help with and sort of talk to people about. So don't think like that's the end of the line. Next slide. All right. So now that your debt is under control, hey!
Yay.
So
cheers.
Skull. Building an emergency reserve fund. We're going to talk. I mean, almost every time we do something, we always talk about the emergency reserve. I think coronavirus, COVID, the pandemic, the shutdown, the quarantine taught us everybody needs to be looking at what's in their emergency reserves. Historically, our industry has told people 3 to 6 months, right, of expenses.
Yep.
For Craig and I, we talk about 6 to 8 weeks just to get something in the bank And this should be an account that is not connected. You can't get at it from, you know, your debit card or your checking account or your phone. You've got to find a way to physically have to go to the bank basically to get these funds. A money market usually comes to mind, or a CD, something like that, where it's not easily accessible. That's what the emergency reserve fund is for. It's an emergency.
Yeah, don't link it to your checking account,
Yes.
your savings account, because it's too easy to just pull over and say, well,
Hey, I need that. You know, what do you know? We're going to Vegas.
Yeah,
Hey, you know, that type of thing. It's not meant for that, right? That's what emergency reserve. You know, retirement savings, we understand. For a lot of people, that's way off into the future. I can't think about right now. I'm trying to get to the end of the month. Might as well, you know, 30 years down the road.
so the Ed Sheeran concert is not considered an emergency?
No, that would not be
Oh,
an
okay.
emergency. That would not be anything to do with your retirement either, right? But retirement, it is important to be thinking about. Next slide. Right, so there's the 3 to 6 months. Again, we say 6 to 8 weeks because I think you're better served just trying to get money in the bank. Next slide.
Well, the other thing too is the goal's too big, you're not going to even bother
You're not
trying.
going to get it. So here's how we do it for everybody. And we're buckets, guys. That's what we do. We talk about everything in buckets. You may be bags or pools, however you want to deal with money, we deal with it in buckets, right? So the bucket number 1, that's your emergency reserve. That should be that 6 to 8 weeks. That's got to get filled. Once that gets filled, I can move to bucket number 2. And bucket number 2 is that I'm saving for that, the new car, the home, something that's, you know, somewhere in
Down
that
payment on
6 to
something, right.
10 year time frame. And then bucket number 3 is longer term, which for most of us is usually retirement or education for a young child. Those are the 3. But as Craig said, the idea isn't I'm pouring into one bucket and I'm ignoring the other 2. No, I am filling bucket number 1, and at the same time I'm pouring a little bit of inkling into bucket 2 and bucket 3.
A little bit of trickling, right? A little small
Once
hole in the
bucket 1 gets filled, then I move all of that into bucket number 2 and spill over into bucket 3, et cetera, et cetera. That's the idea behind it. Next slide. So this just talks about boosting your retirement savings. That's just, you know, in terms of increasing your savings. I'm not going to go through that. Next slide. So our vision with ARIES is trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money, trying to build a path out in terms of the road. Next slide. You know, if you're interested, you want to talk to us, just drop yes into the chat box. You can do that in it. We're happy to have that conversation with you. This is us in our jersey. See, we're in our jerseys. We're out and about. We do stuff in the world. That's what we do. We try to help everybody. Next slide. You can check us out on our YouTube channel. You know, we share these on our website, but if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see all of the presentations that we do. You can also go to newtv.org. You know, you can check us out. We got a channel on there. And lastly, if you ever have any questions, you know, feel free, ariesfoundation.org. You can just fill out the contact us form or just drop us an email. It's info@ariesfoundation.org, and we're happy to try to help you and answer any questions that you have. Other than that, thanks and have a great evening.
Skull.